It was just past 11 p.m. on a quiet December night in Las Vegas. Inside the modest suburban home of a young Air Force family, everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Dinner had been shared. The laughter of children had faded into sleep. And the father, Technical Sergeant Nathan Paete, was preparing for another late shift. As he buttoned his camouflage uniform and stepped into the cool desert air, the night was still, peaceful. Then the stillness broke. A sudden eruption of gunfire tore through the silence, echoing across the neighborhood like thunder. Moments later, the warm, safe home that symbolized love and family was transformed into a scene of panic and bloodshed. What happened that night will reveal a secret web of deceit and unthinkable betrayal, and a conspiracy so cold that investigators would struggle to understand how anyone could plan it. If you're fascinated by true crime stories that expose the darkest corners of human nature, link in the description and pinned comment. Nathan Paete was born on February 12, 1982, on the island of Guam, a tropical U.S. territory where family, faith, and community mean everything. He was one of 5 children raised by Mateo and Carmelina Paete in a tight-knit family that celebrated the values of respect and hard work. Nathan's childhood was marked by laughter, ocean air, and the kind of island simplicity that shaped his kind and generous nature. Friends described him as a bright soul, the kind of person who greeted everyone with a smile, always willing to help, always respectful. He wasn't just a son or a brother. He was a heartbeat of his family, the one who brought people together. At local cultural gatherings, Nathan stood out, known for his smooth dance moves and the joy he brought to every celebration. He loved the water, surfing, paddleboarding, and diving in the turquoise Pacific. Guam's beaches weren't just scenery to him. They were his sanctuary. In high school, Nathan met Michelle, a bright young woman who quickly became the center of his world. They started dating as teenagers, and before long, they welcomed their first child, starting a family before most of their age had even left home. Though young, their love seemed unshakable. They built dreams together, a life filled with hope, responsibility, and purpose. For Nathan, the future seemed simple. Work hard, love deeply, and provide for those he cherished most. In April 2002, seeking stability and service, Nathan enlisted in the United States Air Force. It was a decision rooted in duty to his country, his family, and the values he'd grown up with. His first assignment took him thousands of miles from Guam to the icy landscapes of Elmendorf Air Force Base, Alaska. The shift from tropical beaches to snow-covered runways was jarring, but Nathan adapted quickly. Colleagues admired his focus, discipline, and the quiet strength he carried. Over the years, he transferred to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, rising through the ranks. There, he served as chief of weapons loading for a ground attack aircraft squadron. A demanding and dangerous responsibility he executed with precision. That same year, Nathan married Michelle. Together, they welcomed their second child, building a life that revolved around faith, family, and the Air Force. By the time they moved to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, Nathan had become known for his leadership and reliability. He wasn't just another serviceman. He was someone others looked up to. By 2007, he had been promoted to junior non-commissioned officer in charge of maintenance supply, supporting attack aircraft operations critical to missions abroad. His record was spotless. His superiors described him as a man of integrity, one who carried out his duties without complaint. During the Iraq War, Nathan's commitment only deepened. He served with distinction, earning the respect of fellow airmen. When he returned home to Las Vegas, he was ready to focus on his growing family, now with 4 children. Outside of the base, Nathan was known as a father first, soldier second. He coached his children's T-ball team, the Dodgers, volunteered at school events, and even took extra night shifts to make ends meet. Michelle handled the household and worked part-time in telemarketing. Together, they formed a picture-perfect family, modest, hardworking, deeply bonded. By the end of 2010, Nathan was a 28-year-old technical sergeant with everything to live for. To the world, his life appeared full. A home filled with laughter, family photos, and plans of future. But what no one could see was that just behind that picture of happiness, something dark was quietly unfolding. That evening began like so many others. Nathan returned home, shared dinner with Michelle and the kids. She told him she wasn't feeling well, so he urged her to rest. After tucking the children into bed, Nathan dozed off on the living room couch before his late shift. When his alarm failed to ring, he woke with a start, realizing he was running late. It was 11 p.m. He quickly slipped into his uniform, grabbed his gear, and kissed his wife goodbye before stepping out into the garage. The air was cold and silent. Then 5 gunshots shattered the peace. Michelle froze. The children screamed. Moments later, Nathan stumbled back to the doorway, clutching his chest, bleeding, gasping for air. He collapsed on the living room floor. Panicked, Michelle called 911, sobbing as she begged for help. "Please, my husband's been shot. He's not breathing." The dispatcher guided her through CPR, but the wounds were catastrophic. When paramedics arrived, there was little they could do. At 11:47 p.m., Technical Sergeant Nathan Paete was pronounced dead. The scene was gruesome. Blood covered the garage, the floor, and even the walls. The garage door was wide open. Nathan's personal items, wallet, phone, keys, remained untouched. Nothing had been taken. This was no robbery. It was personal, and whoever did it knew exactly when he'd walk out that door. When detectives arrived at the Paete home, what they found looked nothing like a robbery. There were no broken locks, no forced doors, no signs of struggle beyond the chaos of a man's final moments. Nathan's wallet was still in his pocket. His car was untouched. His home silent. Whoever had done this wasn't there to steal. They were there to kill. The bullets that tore through Nathan Pate's chest had been fired with precision. 5 rounds, center mass. A professional shot, some officers whispered. Others thought it looked personal. Either way, the evidence painted a picture of a man ambushed just steps from safety, dying on the threshold of his own home while his family slept inside. Detectives began with the person who knew him best, his wife, Michelle. She was distraught, trembling, barely coherent as she described what happened. Nathan, she said, had left for work late that night, just before midnight. Minutes later, she heard what sounded like fireworks, then a heavy thud at the door. When she opened it, Nathan was there, gasping for air, blood soaking through his uniform. She thought it was a robbery gone wrong, but police knew better. Nothing had been taken. No random shooter waits in the shadows for one specific man to step outside. Neighbors added fragments to the puzzle. Some had heard gunfire. Others saw a dark-colored car speeding away. A few mentioned a man in a tan hoodie running through the street, but no one saw his face. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds. Quick, deliberate, silent. When news reached Nathan's parents in Guam, they boarded a flight immediately. 20 hours later, they landed in Las Vegas, numb with grief. For his mother, Carmelina, it was unbearable. The thought that her son, a U.S. Air Force staff sergeant who had survived deployments overseas, had been murdered in his own driveway. Michelle fell into her arms crying. But Nathan's brother and sister-in-law sensed something strange. They had spent Thanksgiving with Nathan and Michelle just days before his death. Something had been off between them. Their connection, once easy and affectionate, felt cold. Hollow. Veronica, his sister-in-law, also remembered something odd. Their kitchen nearly empty, the pantry bare. Money had been tight. Nathan had said he was working double shifts to stay afloat. Detectives brought Michelle in again. This time, she admitted things hadn't been perfect. Bills had piled up. Nathan was exhausted. But one comment caught their attention. She mentioned a coworker, a man named Michael Rodriguez, who, coincidentally, drove a dark car similar to the one seen that night. She described him as friendly, kind, someone she spoke with at work, nothing more. Investigators noted it but said nothing. They had learned long ago, nothing friendly is ever just that in a murder case. Michael Rodriguez was 31, with a criminal past that spoke for itself. Forgery, fraud, theft. When detectives brought him in, he was calm, maybe too calm. He claimed he was home that night, nowhere near the Paete residence. He said he barely knew Michelle, but his confidence was misplaced. Detectives secured a warrant for his phone, and what they found unraveled everything. Hidden among hundreds of casual texts between Michael and Michelle was a coded conversation that made their blood run cold. In the days leading up to the shooting, they spoke in riddles, using words like contracts, clients, and deadlines. On the night of the murder, at 11:12 p.m., Michael sent a message. Almost done with the Van Dyke contract. What a headache. 2 minutes later, thanks for your help. Hope you're feeling better. Asterisk, then Michelle replied. Took my meds. Going back to bed. He just left. Detectives recognized a pattern. It wasn't business. It was a countdown. A signal. The Van Dyke contract was code for Nathan. He just left meant the target had stepped outside. When confronted, Michael dismissed it all. He said Van Dyke referred to a work client, nothing sinister. He even had an alibi. He was supposedly at a hotel with a woman named Shannon. But the more detectives listened, the less believable he sounded. They decided to find Shannon themselves. What she told them cracked the case wide open. Shannon was terrified when police found her. She agreed to talk, but only under protection. Through tears, she admitted that Michael had forced her to lie, had promised her money if she backed his story. But she hadn't been at a hotel that night. She had been in an apartment in Henderson, with Michael, a woman named Jessica, and Jessica's boyfriend, Corey. Around 11 p.m., Michael and Corey left together in a black Cadillac. Jessica said they had a job to do. They came back an hour later, shaken, panicked. Shannon saw them throwing clothes into the fireplace, smashing phones, spraying air freshener throughout the room. When she asked what had happened, Michael just muttered, he didn't even see it coming. That was when Shannon realized this wasn't about drugs. It was murder. Detectives verified everything. Hotel surveillance showed Michael and Shannon arriving 40 minutes after Nathan's death, not before. His alibi collapsed. A search of Jessica and Corey's apartment uncovered latex gloves, burned fabric, bottles of Febreze. Every detail Shannon described. There was no denying it anymore. This wasn't random. It was a planned execution, a coordinated hit carried out by 4 people. And at the heart of it all was Michelle Paete. When detectives confronted her with the evidence, the messages, the phone records, the witness statements, she broke. The calm, grieving widow faded. Through sobs, she admitted everything. The affair, the plan, the motive. She claimed it wasn't her idea, that Michael had manipulated her, convinced her it was the only way out of her financial mess. But her words couldn't mask the truth. She had agreed. And the price on Nathan Paete's life was $650,000, the total of his life insurance policies. Love, money, betrayal. A perfect storm of greed and deceit had ended in blood. The man who had dedicated his life to protecting others was killed by the person he trusted most. Once Michelle Paete confessed, everything unraveled at a speed that stunned even seasoned detectives. For weeks, she had stood at vigils, crying for her husband, clutching framed photos of the cameras, all while knowing she had orchestrated his death. Now, sitting in a cold interrogation room, her hands trembling, she whispered the truth the world refused to believe. She hadn't pulled the trigger, but she had opened the door that led her husband to his grave. The confession sent shockwaves through the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Officers who worked alongside Nathan, who had saluted with him, suddenly found themselves investigating his widow. The betrayal cut deep, not just because Nathan was one of their own, but because the plot had been planned with such precision, such quiet cruelty, that it seemed almost clinical. Michelle's story was both chilling and pathetic. She said she had been drowning in debt, juggling bills, terrified of losing the house. Michael Rodriguez, her coworker, her lover, had offered a way out. If Nathan died, she would collect on his military life insurance. $650,000. Enough to start over, to run away, to live free of her problems. But it wasn't just greed. There was manipulation, infatuation, and the kind of emotional blindness that can turn guilt into justification. Rodriguez had convinced her that Nathan was abusive, unfaithful, that he didn't deserve her loyalty. And in that fog of lies and desperation, Michelle agreed to the unthinkable. She signed her husband's death warrant. The deal was simple. Rodriguez would recruit help, a small circle of accomplices who knew how to stay quiet. Jessica Austin, a friend of his, and her boyfriend Corey would provide the vehicle and act as lookouts. Shannon, the woman who later broke down under guilt, would be the alibi. Michelle would give Rodriguez the timing, when Nathan left, when the coast was clear, when it was safe to strike. All she had to do was text him. And when she sent that final message, he just left. She sealed his fate. Police pieced the puzzle together with surgical precision. Phone pings placed Rodriguez near the Paete home minutes before the shooting. Surveillance from nearby traffic cameras caught the faint outline of his black Cadillac speeding away from the scene. Gunshot residue was found on a glove recovered from his apartment, a glove that DNA linked back to him. It was enough. On November 19, 2010, nearly a year after murder, police arrested Michelle Paete for conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder with a deadly weapon. Rodriguez, Jessica, and Corey were taken into custody soon after. In the early hearings, Michelle appeared fragile, withdrawn, her face pale, her eyes empty, but her words carried the weight of calculated deceit. She pleaded not guilty, claiming she had been manipulated by Rodriguez, that she had only discussed killing Nathan in theory, never believing it would actually happen. Her attorney argued that she was emotionally unstable, under the influence of prescription medication, vulnerable to coercion. But prosecutors were unmoved. They had the texts, the insurance records, the timing, the confession. And above all, they had motive, money, and infidelity, the two oldest poisons in human history. During Rodriguez's trial, the jury was shown the messages in sequence, every coded phrase, every false word of affection. They saw how a workplace flirtation had become an affair, then a conspiracy, then a murder. Rodriguez sat expressionless as Shannon testified, her voice trembling as she described that night. How he came home, shaking and cold, saying, "It's done." He dropped like a rock. The courtroom fell silent. Even the defense attorney couldn't find a way to soften those words. When it was Michelle's turn to face justice, she took the stand. She cried, begged for understanding, said she wished she could take it all back. But her tears couldn't erase the trail of evidence. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours. Verdict: guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Michael Rodriguez received the same. Jessica, Austin, and Corey were convicted of aiding and abetting and received lengthy sentences of their own. Shannon, whose testimony had helped bring them all down, was granted immunity. She still lives under protection, haunted by what she saw, by what she almost became part of. In the end, it was greed that killed Nathan Paete, but it was love, twisted and hollow, that made it possible. Michelle's betrayal remains one of the most shocking in Las Vegas history. Not because of how the murder was done, but because of who ordered it. A wife who stood before her husband's casket and whispered, "I'll love you forever," knowing she had already arranged his death. The courtroom emptied. Nathan's family held hands, silent, their faces wet with tears but fixed with quiet resolve. Justice had come, but peace never would. When the verdict was read, there was no applause, no triumph, only stillness. For Nathan Paete's family, victory in court meant little against the reality of his absence. His mother, Carmelina, wept quietly in the hallway. She had prayed for justice, but as the handcuffs clicked around Michelle's wrists, she realized something no mother should. She had lost not only her son, but the woman she had once called daughter, a family shattered from both ends. Nathan's colleagues in the Air Force held a private memorial in his honor. They placed his uniform on an empty chair, folded his flag, and played taps beneath the desert sky. He was remembered as a man of quiet strength, someone who worked harder than anyone else, who dreamed of building a future for his children, a father whose last act was trying to make it home. Friends describe him as a type who could make anyone laugh, the one who'd show up at midnight to help fix a car, or cover a shift so someone else could sleep. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. But to those who knew him, Nathan was everything that mattered. Loyal, gentle, alive with purpose. The Las Vegas community followed the case for years, shocked not only by the brutality of the crime, but by its intimacy. True crime enthusiasts would later call it one of the most emotionally devastating cases in Nevada's modern history, a story of how love, when poisoned by greed, can turn fatal. Even seasoned detectives admitted it lingered with them. One retired officer told a local paper, "I've seen gang shootings, robberies, revenge killings, but a woman planning her husband's murder from their own bed, that's a different kind of evil." In prison, Michelle Paete lives under a quiet shadow. Those who met her say she rarely speaks about Nathan, that she spends most of her days in isolation, working in the laundry room, her eyes fixed on the floor. When reporters tried to reach her for comment, she refused. But one letter, leaked years later, showed a single haunting line written in her hand. "If I could trade my life for his, I would, but hell doesn't make trades." Michael Rodriguez, too, has remained silent. He spends his days behind bars, reportedly unrepentant, still claiming that Michelle exaggerated his role. The truth, as it often does, died with Nathan. Nathan's family continues to honor him each year on November 19th, lighting candles, visiting his grave, and sharing stories that keep his laughter alive. His name is inscribed on a memorial for fallen service members who died under criminal circumstances, a quiet acknowledgement of a soldier betrayed at home. For his children, the legacy is heavy. They grew up not with their father's embrace, but with his headlines, learning piece by piece what happened the night the world went dark. Their story is one of survival, a living reminder what violence takes, and what love, real love, endures. The murder of Nathan Paete is more than a story of crime. It's a warning about how desperation can masquerade as affection, how greed can with a massive need, and how one decision, whispered in darkness, can echo for generations. Because in the end, Nathan's tragedy wasn't written in blood alone. It was written in trust, betrayed, broken, and gone forever. In memory of Staff Sergeant Nathan Paete, 1976 to 2010, a father, a soldier, a man who served with honor, and deserved far better than the love that ended his life.